Hello and welcome to the Art of Being Human. On the last segment, we talked about defense mechanisms and adjustment mechanisms, and these are the traditional ways that people handle stress in their lives. And you don't choose which one that you're going to use. There are about 10 of them in all. You don't choose personally what you use. It's your body does it for you. And so therefore your stress level and your reasons and ways of handling stress may be different than somebody else's. But that's all right. We can identify that, and we can talk about what you use. And as we go through the list, and we went through a lot of them, but we didn't quite finish, so we're going to finish today. You can probably just pinpoint what your body does naturally. And so I'm going to just review a little bit of about what I said last time, just to give you a definition, and then go on from there and finish the rest of them. You know, as you know people and you get to know their personalities, you get to know how they react to stress. They react to stress in a certain way. Someone's going to yell and scream. Someone's going to dig in and work harder. Someone's going to chuck it and go and do something else. And this is their way of reacting to stress in their lives. This is traditional for them. So I say it's a traditional way for you to react to stress because it's traditional for you what you do. You tend to do the same thing over and over and over again. But it's not like you've planned it that way. You've grown up that way. So can it be changed? Can you do something else? Well, yeah, I think you can, but you'd have to be given therapy. You'd have to have help because it would be a major change of orientation for you. But I'm not saying it couldn't happen. So I'm going to just list off and define what we've done so far and then go on from there. The first one we went into was working harder. If you are unsuccessful in doing something, you keep trying and trying and trying and working harder until you've accomplished it. Sometimes healthy, sometimes not. It's healthy in a way that if you work harder, you will improve. If you're in school and you're having a problem and you want to increase your grades, you do work harder. It does help out. The only time when it becomes unhealthy is if you get stuck in it. And if you get stuck in it and you can't move on because you have just got to do more and more and more to accomplish what it is that you want to accomplish, then you can get stuck in it. You can get stuck in any one of these defense mechanisms. And remember, they do have their good, healthy or unhealthy parts. So that's working harder. Compensation is if you're unsuccessful in something, you do something else instead. Generally speaking, very healthy, as long as you don't give up too soon on what it is that you want to do. You know, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer and you go to school and you're finding it's more difficult than you thought, should you just chuck it and walk away? Well, maybe so if you feel that you really cannot make progress. If you still want to do it, then you need to give it a fair shot. But when you find that you're getting stuck and it's not helping to work harder, then it is helpful to be able to drop it and then do something else instead. So basically, we'd have to say that compensation is basically a healthy kind of defense mechanism. Rationalization, what would appear to be a good excuse for poor behavior, or I might want to say a good excuse for unsuccessful behavior. A good excuse meaning it sounds plausible, but it probably may not be the real reason. The thing is, you think it's the real reason. If it's rationalization, you make it seem like the real reason. If it's an excuse, you know better. It's the dog ate my homework. I didn't finish my homework, I couldn't, the dog ate it. That's a poor excuse and everybody knows it. But if you really believe that something happened and it caused you not to be able to finish something, then that becomes a rationalization. If you believe it's the truth and it's not just an excuse. Then we went into attention getting, doing things that draw attention to yourself. It's usually not that healthy because what you're doing is you're denying your way to becoming a full-fledged person because you're doing something else to draw attention to yourself. That means something is wrong in your life. If you have to get attention in an unhealthy way to have attention, or if you have a decided need for excess attention, there's something behind it. Were you neglected as a child? Did you not have the success that you needed, so you tried to draw attention to yourself by showing how smart you were? You know, I had a college professor, and everyone considered him to be a hard professor. That is, he piled on the homework. He made you do work, and every year it got worse. The same courses, every year the requirements to pass his course were greater and greater and greater. And he wanted the students to think of him as being brilliant. I knew that was the case. I found out that was the case. Well, he would make it so difficult for students that they didn't want to take his class because he was being unreasonable. You know, I believe that in college you have to meet challenges and you have to do difficult work. But when it's more difficult than it needs to be just to prove a point, so you can prove how hard a professor you are, which means in his terms, I wouldn't mean it in my terms, but in his terms, it meant he was so smart. Well, why did he have to be so smart that he couldn't allow students to be human beings, and he had to be very, very, very rigid in what he required? Well, it turned out that his thesis to become a PhD was denied. So he had gone through all of this work in school, and he didn't get his doctorate degree. After all of that work, it was denied. So his reaction to that was, I don't have a PhD, but I have to show the students that I'm smart enough to have a PhD, and the way to do that is to require them to do so much work and be miserable with them. And if I do that, then they'll think of me as being brilliant. Now, I consider that as not very good. This is not the way to teach. This is not the way to gain respect from your students, just to prove a point of how smart you are. I met one student while I was a student, and this is not a professor, who wanted to use the longest, most difficult words that he could use to prove that he was smart to other students, maybe to himself as well. So if he could take a simple sentence and make it difficult and sound smart, he would do it just to prove how smart he was, because he needed to be smart in order to go through college. Now, I don't view that, you know, be a person. Talk like a person. Don't try to put on an act. So what I did, and I suppose it infuriated him, is every time, because I was in with a group of friends and he joined us and he would do that, every time he had said a sentence that was much more difficult than it needed to be, I said the same sentence in a simple way, meaning the same thing that anyone could understand. Because this is the way I teach. I try to make things simple enough so anyone can grasp it. And you can grasp a lot of things without having to understand the words of every dictionary that's been published. So, and he didn't like that at all, because he couldn't get away with what he was doing. But at any rate, this would be attention-getting behavior. Prove that you're smarter than everybody else. Prove by showing that you're going to do things that are going to draw attention to yourself, or be sick because you want attention from your family or other people. This is not healthy. Identification would be trying to be like somebody, and it can be anything from idol worship to something that's bizarre. Trying to be like somebody else by adopting their lifestyle, their clothing, the way they talk, their hairstyle, their politics, even dyeing your hair to look like the person's hair. Now, in a child, we expect idol worship, and role modeling is very important to a child. As you grow up, you need to identify yourself as yourself and be truly yourself, not a makeshift person that that somebody else is, not to model somebody else, but be who you are. If you have healthy role modeling as a child, then you can understand the good points of a person and kind of adopt those good points. But there's a far difference between adopting their good points and becoming them. You have to become yourself, not become another person. You can adopt some of their behavior in a sense, or their idol, or their identification in terms of what their belief system is, but you need to be who you are. And you can role model, or you can be role modeled, so you have some of the same characteristics, the same values. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But you can't become that other person. You can't become them. You have to be you. Now, so that would be identification. Now, what we did not go over is projection. And projection, and this is not healthy, projection is blaming somebody else for your own faults. If you have some things, difficulties in your personality, so you don't get along with people, or whatever it is that's wrong, or you have some attitudes that are bad that do not help you in terms of your success, you project your weaknesses onto other people. So you tend to blame other people for what it is that you're having a problem with. So supposing I am very sarcastic, and I don't treat people well because I'm sarcastic. I say nasty things to them. Maybe not nasty, but cutting things. You know what sarcasm is. It's like you cut a person down by your tongue, which is, I think, always a bad thing. Sarcasm is not a good thing. So people confront you about it. You're being sarcastic. You're turning people away because you're sarcastic. So if I'm going to project, if I'm going to use this projection as a defense mechanism, I would say, well, so-and-so is sarcastic to me. I don't recognize the fact that I've been sarcastic to somebody else. I throw that sarcastic image onto somebody else and say they've been sarcastic to me. I wasn't sarcastic, but they were sarcastic to me. So in a sense, I throw my problems onto somebody else, and I identify somebody else as having those problems and treating those problems as their problem, and do not recognize the fact that I'm the one that's got the problem. I don't recognize it because I'm giving it to somebody else. Now, that's always unhealthy. And the reason it's unhealthy is that you don't grow from that. You just blame people. So if there's a person I don't like because they're always doing something or always saying something or they're always using foul language, it may not be them. I may be the one doing it, but I'm not going to recognize it in myself. I'm only going to recognize it in somebody else. Well, what would be the purpose of that? Well, the purpose of that is that I don't have to deal with it. If I don't have it and it belongs to somebody else, then I don't have to deal with it. What's their fault? They're sarcastic. They're rude. They say bad language. Me? I'm fine. It's somebody else. It's always somebody else. And so that is not a good defense mechanism at all. It is a way of getting away from it and not dealing with it because you don't want to have it, but at the same time, you don't want to deal with it. You don't want to look at yourself, and so you push it on to somebody else. It's their problem. Now, repression, we have not done repression either. It's forced forgetting. If you have been through traumatic experiences, you forget those experiences. And I know I hear people say it all the time. Well, if it was that bad, I'd remember it, wouldn't I? But that's not the case. The way the brain works is the brain acts as a self-protective device. And if you've been hurt, if a lot of bad things have happened to you, you will remember some. You're not going to forget everything, but you force forget. It goes down into your subconscious, and you don't remember. And it's the worst things that happen to you that you tend not to remember. You think you would remember the worst because it's so traumatic, but actually you don't remember the worst. It's forced forgetting. Now, not everybody uses this mechanism, so it might not affect you at all, but if you do use this mechanism, you forget. So what happens in psychotherapy, supposing you have a deep-seated problem and you have been abused in your past, and you go for therapy, and the therapist is going to know you're not remembering everything. I mean, who does? Who remembers everything? And so what they're going to do is work with you and gradually, very carefully, not too fast, because you don't want to put a person in a crisis situation. You can cause a crisis situation if you push too much and you push too fast, and a person remembers too much too soon. It puts a person in a crisis situation. So you can't do that. But you push a little bit, and over a period of months, however long the therapy takes, people start to remember things that they'd long ago forgotten. The time that their parents threw them down the steps, the times that their father came home drunk. I mean, it could be any number of things, but traumatic things. And as you remember these things, you can integrate them in your personality. And what I mean by that is you allow yourself to remember and you allow yourself to heal from it, because healing is possible. Healing is available. It takes time to do it. It takes time to do it. But healing is available. And when you heal from it, you're still going to remember it. But you're not going to remember it in a traumatic kind of way. You don't forget it, but at the same time, it doesn't have to raise its head to haunt you. The thing that causes the problem is if you have forgotten a whole lot of traumatic things and you're not aware of what you've forgotten, and it kind of slips out sideways and you become traumatized. There are things you can't do. There are things that you won't do. And all of a sudden, and you're in a state of distress. You're nervous. You're anxious. Something's wrong somewhere. You can't get along with people. You have no idea why. And as you work this through in therapy, gradually you start remembering the things that caused you to be that way. Because remember, there's no such thing as a symptom without a cause. And then you get to the point where you can forgive a person for hurting you. And then that's very important in the healing process. I wouldn't want to leave that out. Forgiveness is terribly important in the healing process. And because you don't want to be under a rock. You don't want to be under a stone. You don't want a heaviness about you. You want to be able to heal. One of the ways to heal is to forgive. And that makes you free. It frees you up so you don't have to be influenced by the traumatic event. The traumatic event happened. There's nothing that'll change that. But you don't have to allow it to haunt you. It doesn't have to creep up on you and cause you a lot of distress, and you don't know where the distress is coming from. You start to remember, but at the same time you can handle it and you can heal from it. And that's very, very important. So repression is really not a good defense mechanism, but we do all forget some. There's no person that doesn't ever have a problem in forgetting. Everybody forgets something, but some people who are abused or who have been challenged or who are injured in warfare or whatever, they repress a lot more than others of us that haven't had those bad experiences. But whatever you repress can affect you, and you tend to repress the worst things. Now, daydreaming. Daydreaming is a phasing out. It's an escape. There's another word for it, dissociation. And there are a number of dissociative responses which I am not going to get into at this point because it's a little bit too complicated. But when you daydream, you just kind of make an escape. You're thinking about something else. Have you ever driven along and you want to take an exit, but you get to thinking about something and you drive past the exit and you realize that you've driven too far and you have to turn around and go back? It's that kind of thing. You could actually be daydreaming while you're watching television or anything, and people will say, hey, wake up, I'm talking to you, and your mind is somewhere else completely. Is this bad or good? I think it depends upon how much it's done. If you're in doing a lot of daydreaming, you can kind of lose your contact with reality because you're not in reality, you're in your own little world. That may not be good. As a temporary escape, there's nothing wrong with it, and everybody does it. concept, but you just have to be careful that it's not overused, because if it's overused, it can lead to some mental problems, which are the dissociative reactions that I'm not going to discuss. But that is important. Now, regression is acting younger than your age. Because if you act younger than your age, you may feel younger emotionally. And so this is regression. You act like a child when you're an adult because that gives you attention, and you're going to find that a lot of these defense mechanisms kind of blend together. And then withdrawal. Withdrawal, you withdraw from reality, you lose contact with reality. This is not a healthy mechanism at all. And what happens is that you start developing some mental illness because you have cut yourself off from the real world. Now, a lot of this is biochemically induced, so I'm not saying all of that is a person's fault, but if you deliberately try to withdraw and be to yourself and be a loner, being a loner isn't itself a problem. A lot of people are kind of loners. I am myself, but I also like people and I mix in with people frequently. But if you withdraw, so you're not a part of reality and you cut yourself off from reality, then you become mentally ill. And as I say, some parts of this may be biochemically induced. So I'm going to close it here. This kind of completes the defense mechanism. So next time when I come in, I really want to get into the PTSD. I didn't want to do it until I did this first because we have such individual ways of reacting to stress that I thought it would be important to have this as kind of a prelude. So we'll continue with PTSD next time. We're out of time. Please join me then.